And we are live. Good afternoon. Welcome to Leadership Lives. It's Debra, and me again. And what we want you to think about to open this particular live is we want you to think about the last time you were in a conversation, a really important one, when you felt entirely yourself, totally relaxed, you're being you, and only to have the other person look at you with confusion, not because your words were wrong, but because the you that you were projecting didn't quite make it across the language barrier. We often talk about language learning as something mechanical, especially things like grammar or learning vocabulary. But what happens to our personality when we're forced to navigate a culture that doesn't have a map for who we are? Today, we're unpacking the vulnerability of being an outsider. Debra and I think, are outsiders. Do you define yourself as an outsider, Debra?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a North American living in Oaxaca, Mexico, and
Yeah.
have to cross the English-Spanish line on a daily basis, and my partner is Oaxacan and his native language is Spanish, although he speaks excellent English, and my native language obviously is English. And while I speak excellent Spanish, there are often times that even just between the two of us, we encounter the barriers and the misunderstandings based on our first language and our knowledge of the second language, history, and culture.
Yes, yeah. I can definitely relate to that. And you've been an outsider at other times in your life as well, when you were living in Saudi Arabia, I think.
Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and then have traveled extensively throughout the world.
Yeah. So today we're going to be looking at how to balance being an outsider with belonging, and why translation is often the enemy of genuine connection. So Debra and I am joined obviously again by Debra Carlson. We spent a lot of time preparing for this podcast, analyzing the mechanics of how we communicate across borders, both cultural and linguistic. We see brilliant people who are masters of their craft in their mother tongue, yet who feel diminished or even lesser the moment they step into a second language. So Debra's here with me today to help us explore the hidden cost of translating our identity, and why the struggle to be understood is actually the most important part of the journey. So we often tell our students, don't we, Debra, that they shouldn't translate when we're teaching English as a foreign language. Don't translate, we tell them. But the truth is, I think, that we translate ourselves constantly. When you're coaching someone who's high achieving, but feels they lose their edge or their specific sense of humor when they switch languages, how do you help them reconcile that? Why does the act of translation feel like a loss of self rather than just a shift in tools?
Well, it really is a loss. When you stop and think about it, there's a huge difference, or at least a great difference, between translating and interpreting. Sometimes a direct translation can capture the words perfectly, but the person from another society, culture, it even applies across age groups within the same culture, that they aren't familiar with the context of the phrase that you're using. One funny example that comes to mind is I once told my Mexican husband I was late because I was in a traffic jam. And I could hear him on the phone pausing, and I could subconsciously hear his head cocking as he was thinking, she's in jelly or jam or marmalade of traffic. What on
You
earth
understood
does that mean?
marmalade, yeah. Mhm.
Marmalade or jelly. We don't
Yeah.
have a word for traffic jam in Spanish. We just say, there is a lot of traffic and it is going slow and I'm going to be late. And the same happens sometimes when we make a joke. There are not only language differences in the jokes, but there are cultural differences as well. We were joking about a person one day. I won't give the specific context of the setting. And I said, well, we can just solve the problem by killing them. Ha 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 ha. Typical American joke.
Yeah.
Until recently, it was a very typical American joke to joke about wanting to kill someone or being so angry I want to kill someone. In Mexico, that's not funny. That's not a joke. And it is interpreted as close to literal as one could interpret it. And so the humor is lost, the tension in the conversation is created, and there is a complete loss of communication, and also a little bit of the sense of identity of no, time out. I'm not that kind of person. We have to reconcile and explain what we meant and come to peace with what the intent was. And that takes work, and it takes time to reflect and listen. And that's not something we human beings are always good at.
Exactly. Yes, we feel, I think, like it should come naturally. You just made me think about a time a couple of years ago where I met a neighbor of mine outside, and I was walking the dog, and she asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm just walking the dog while I'm cooking my dinner." And she looked at me and she like this kind of, "Can you cook?" She asked me in Spanish. And cooking is actually one of my hobbies. I'm not a very good cook, but I'm okay as a cook. It's one of my hobbies. It felt really, really weird that she thought that I wasn't able to cook. And I don't know where she got that idea from. Maybe because I'm a man and all men can't cook. Or maybe she saw a lot of pizza being delivered to my house. Or maybe she thinks I just eat noodles every day. It just felt really, really weird. It felt really weird that, that this person who I get on with so well, it kind of didn't seem to even know me. But I think that's what we're talking about, isn't it? This things get lost in translation, especially when you're from another country, as we are. I think it's this is probably something that happens everywhere, but it's more marked when you're from another place, and then the people have a particular view of you or idea about who you are, and sometimes it can be really, really different from the reality. Really like, can you cook? Thought you were kind of stupid. I mean,
well, and that's a very typical misunderstanding here in Oaxaca, where the middle and upper class people,
right,
both males and females, many do not know how to cook. Many of us, for example, we have a full-time woman who works in our house and makes us meals every day, and when I come in the kitchen and I make something, whether it's cookies or a pot roast or a meatloaf, or I spice something up, everyone is stunned that La Señora knows how to cook. Or when I wash dishes, I can wash them at the speed of light, because as a North American, we begin washing dishes at 5 years old. And when my husband asked marry me, he asked me if this is a fun anecdote. He said, do you watch much television? And I thought about it and I said, well, I like to watch TV while I'm washing the dishes, if I'm home alone and I'm cooking, or if I'm doing the laundry or ironing. I like to put on, an old movie or a TV show and rewatch it while I'm doing household tasks. And he had a very confused look on his face, and he said, well, you will never do those things ever again. And it was such a great cultural divide that
Uh-huh.
that I have someone to take care of all these needs for me that he couldn't comprehend. I did all of those things while being entertained on the television set. I have periodically cooked a meal and have done some laundry, and I have not picked up iron, however, in the 8 years I've lived here in Mexico.
And maybe it's a thing about men cooking, because Mexico is a very machista country where men are men and women are women, and the roles are very, very defined. Maybe that was part of the surprise. But you know, it still was a bit of that happens, doesn't it? One would have thought that after 25 years living here that I wouldn't be shocked by things anymore. But there are these moments, no, where you suddenly feel really like an outsider, and it's unexpected. You know, you don't expect them. You know, and it's because I wonder what she expects, what she thought I ate. Because
well, you did mention the pizza delivery boxes.
Yeah, just pure pizza. And Maruchan. It was very, very interesting, but it was kind of unsettling. But anyway, getting back to let's talk a bit about marriage, because I used to be married to a Mexican. I was married to a Mexican for over a decade, and you're married to a Mexican. Do you think that, like, these kind of problems with things, especially humor, about laughing together, for example, that get lost in translation? Do you think it's ever possible for a foreigner and or two people from two different cultures? I suppose I'm asking about intercultural marriages or intercultural relationships. Do you think it's possible for those two people to ever? It's kind of like a loaded question, because I think it is possible, but if things are getting lost in translation all the time, is it possible to have a relationship interculturally? I mean, obviously it is possible, because you're doing it. And
I'm doing it.
And I've done it.
And so far, successfully.
Yeah. But how do you get past these kind of moments of not being able to laugh together? Do you know what I mean? Because you can't make, because he doesn't get any of your jokes, I suppose, or he doesn't get some of your, or a lot of your jokes, and vice versa. And I've been there as well. You know, how does all of that work?
Well, we've coped with it in a couple of different ways. One relates back to one of our previous podcasts, where we talked about the importance of body language. And I think we have both increased our sensitivity to body language, to facial expressions, to physical reactions, to know the other person definitely is not understanding what I am attempting to communicate. And the other is to stop and work through it. In working with students, I will oftentimes, when I realize I'm about to use a definitely American expression or an older person expression, I will stop and say, have you heard the expression, for example, a diamond is a girl's best friend, which comes from a famous song and a famous musical in the United States, but it's now quite old. Well, it's obviously not familiar to my students in Latin American countries, and my North American students are not familiar with it as well. So
because of the age difference,
and so I oftentimes stop and preface with my remark with, "Do you know this expression? A penny for your thoughts?" Or I oftentimes say to my student, "It's very difficult for an 18-year-old to eat crow. So if you get waitlisted at a college or university, don't speak badly about it." And I can see their reaction of, it's hard to eat crow. And even my North American students, that expression is dated now. I don't know what expression they would use. And sometimes we explore, well, what would you say in your age group? Or what would you say in Spanish to capture that idea so that we can grow together and our senses of humor can come together? And sometimes prefacing it with, I'm about to make a joke, is very helpful. Those language road signs that we give. I need to talk to you about something serious, or I'm about to make a joke. You might not get it, but I'll explain it afterwards. And how have you handled it? How did you and your partner handle it in your relationship when
Well, the funny thing is that I think despite the cultural differences, we were very similar personality-wise and sense of humor-wise anyway, so that helped, I think we had both grown up, because I arrived in Mexico relatively young. We'd both grown up. We had a shared experience of Mexico in the 2000s, and that I shared that history. I think that helps. Even though I grew up in Ireland and he grew up in Mexico, so that's something that we didn't share. I think to answer your question, I think the most important thing was to create jokes and funny experiences together, so that then we would laugh about things that we had lived together. So rather than me saying, have you seen such and such a hilarious BBC comedy series from the 1980s? It's hilarious for me, but not for him, because okay, he was around in the 1980s, but it's just not. It's not. So that's something that you can't share with the other person. But there are lots of things in the present moment that you can share, and you build something moving forward. I think that's the answer to it.
Well, that's an excellent example of how you and your partner together build cultural literacy. Yeah. But now tell me, that's something between two people who are very close and who spend a lot of time together. And our audiences, our relationships are much broader and wider than that. So what advice do you have for people on a bigger scale for how to develop what we might call a cultural literacy?
You mean like what, for work, for example, or for making new friends and fitting into a community where nobody knows you? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
There it really is. You become Maya Angelou. I think you have to accept that you're an outsider, and see that as something positive, and see loneliness as being alone, like totally alone. Like we're talking about being an outsider here. You really have to see that. I think I see that you know what I mean. Like being a woman who worked for you in Saudi Arabia, I imagine an American. I imagine that you really felt like super outside. No, outside. Oh,
very much so.
So you have to accept that and value it, actually, even though sometimes you might feel totally alone. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you feel totally alone sometimes, because you are totally alone. And then you have to have the courage, I think, to pull up a chair, because often people won't in, the locals won't invite you in. You have to pull up a chair and sit down and say, hi, I'm Dara, and act and speak in a culturally appropriate way. You have to change who you are, actually, for the others. You make the sacrifice and sit down, because you've put yourself into a situation where you are an outsider, and then very, very quickly people invite you in, and then you belong, you see, and then you can start doing that work of building shared experiences with the people who you become friends with. I think that's the way that's worked for me, but it requires an awful lot of courage. Do you know what I mean? Because you really do have to set aside totally who you are, and most people don't like that, but you have to really forget about who. Well, I mean, obviously inside you know who you are, but people won't understand you. They will imagine that you can't cook and things like that. It's like, can you cook?
I've had two different sets of experiences
Okay.
that represent that concept. In Saudi Arabia, first I should say I grew up and I changed schools 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th grades. Was an exchange student to Mexico, went off to college. And I very quickly, and I'm an introvert. You'd never know it to talk to me, but I'm horribly shy. I'm petrified to go to big events. But I learned very early in life, nobody is standing there waiting to be your friend. You've got to stick your hand out. You have to say, hello, I'm the new kid on the block. Even that, that's an expression that Mexicans wouldn't, my family in Mexico wouldn't understand, the new kid on the block. It's not something we say here. And so I learned to do that. And in Saudi Arabia, I didn't need to do that. The stereotype of the North American there is that we don't like Saudis. We don't appreciate Muslim culture or Islam. And when I would go to,
think, is it? That's what they think.
That's what some of them think, of course.
Okay.
But many of them. And so when I would be at the mall, everything is gender segregated. In the malls, men and women wander around at the same time, but women don't approach men nor vice versa. But the women would approach me and they would say, "Who are you? What are you doing?" They wanted to be my friend. They wanted to draw me in. They were so excited at the prospect that here was an American who didn't hate them or hate their culture and actually chose to go and live there. Where I had the opposite experience in Qatar, which is a very small country. Most of you know it for the World Cup, the last World Cup. And there, it's
much more closed than Saudi Arabia.
It's much more closed. It was a very poor fishing community and pearl-oriented community until they discovered oil and gas. And they became millionaires overnight. And the ratio of outsiders to insiders was 3-to-1. And so it became very important to the Qataris to maintain a social distance and keep a social status, because they were literally, there were 3 times the number of foreigners in their country than there were citizens. And so there, it was a much more difficult social interaction to make true friendships, develop real relationships, because they didn't want to lose the status and the power that they had socially within their country. So to develop those friendships was much more difficult, although their English is stronger typically than you'll find in Saudi Arabia. Both do use English as their primary language. But
and I suppose that you had to learn Arabic, no? Was that because I know in Mexico it is essential to learn Spanish because so few people speak English in Mexico. To make really, really good friends here, you must do it all in Spanish, no? Was that your experience in Arab-speaking nations? Did you learn Arabic? Did you get stuck into Arabic, or was it English was enough?
English was more than enough.
Interesting.
Everyone, their educational systems are in English. The different types of Arabic are very different, and no one speaks classic Arab or Arabic. And they don't know how to teach it because of the differences between the tribes, the regions, different countries. Interestingly enough, my daughter was part of a social science experiment and an educational experiment sponsored by the U.S. State Department, where in high school, she took a pre-Arabic test and then went and lived in Egypt for 3 months and lived with an Egyptian family and took Arabic classes 6 hours a day, and then had a post-test at the end, because no one had ever taught Arabic in schools before. So it didn't have a pedagogy. They didn't know how to approach it. And so each year they were working on trying to develop, and it had to be classic Arabic, not one of the tribal offshoots of the language or one of the country offshoots, but what you would hear, for instance, on I can't think of the name of the radio station, of the TV station, but it's the equivalent of the Al Qaeda. No, not
Al Jazeera. No,
Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera. For example, I was with the Queen of Qatar on a tour of Al Jazeera, and they told her Arabic wasn't sufficient to be employed as one of their TV broadcasters because it was Qatari Arabic. It was not classic Arabic.
Yeah.
And that the look on literally to the queen of the country, to say to her, we would not hire you. Your Arabic isn't the right kind, and it isn't at a high enough level, was a fascinating experience.
Interesting. And what, getting back to fitting in, as a woman in Saudi, in Qatar, I mean, and you are a feminist, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I think I know you well enough. A very independent woman, and how? Because I'm sure that there were times you felt that you had to sacrifice, at least publicly, you had to sacrifice who you are in order to fit in, and in order not to offend people or insult people as well. Did you feel that, or were you able to navigate that without any sense of loss?
There was some sense of loss. I'm a very physical person. I shake hands. I embrace people.
Women can't do that. No. Mm-hmm.
No, and for example, there are more conservative Muslims where the men cannot touch any woman whom he might be eligible to marry someday. So he can shake hands with his sister or hug his sister, but he can't even shake hands with his sister-in-law. And even though it's forbidden to marry your wife's sister, if your wife were to die, you could marry your sister-in-law. Therefore, you cannot shake her hand because sometime 20, 30, 50 years in the future, she could become a candidate to be your spouse. And so even though at the time it's absolutely forbidden, because there's this ultimate possibility. So I learned not to assume I could shake a man's hand or put my hand on his shoulder to get his attention if he were my employee, not to publicly criticize or engage in any conversation that could be misinterpreted as a negative comment or a negative conversation or a criticism, in particular with a male, was very important. And even if the least intelligent person in the room was a man and said something not intelligent, not capable, that we couldn't understand or dissect even, we had to pretend we understood it and agreed with it and supported the idea because of the gender imbalance. That's slowly changing. I left Saudi Arabia in 2018, just as women were given the right to drive cars. And that was an interesting experience because the king made the announcement 6 or 9 months earlier that beginning on June 1st, 2018, that women would be able to drive cars. And everyone was just petrified at what was going to happen at the Department of Motor Vehicles, at the schools where they teach driving, that thousands of women would be descending upon them and they wouldn't be able to handle the masses. Well, it turned out that more than 50% of the women already had driver's license from England or the Emirates or from Qatar car. They had all just gone on holiday and gotten their driver's licenses over the last 2, 5, 10, 20 years. And they drove in other countries. They just weren't allowed to have a Saudi license and to drive at home. So the cultural differences were very dramatic. So you had to be very sensitive about humor, and sexism, and you had to laugh at sexist jokes, that they were accepted at that point in time. But fortunately, women worldwide are standing up for themselves, whether confrontationally or in a more gentle, careful fashion, discussing how the Prophet Muhammad might handle something, and that maybe this wouldn't be accepted in our culture and you should rethink your approach. Because you get more flies with honey, as they say, than you do with vinegar.
Yeah, it depends on how
another
you frame
one
it,
of those expressions that doesn't translate.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I like that expression very much. It's a very nice way of explaining the idea of framing something in a way that is understandable and non-insulting for the other person. No.
Absolutely.
And how? I mean, did you learn to fully accept? Because I think I have accepted, as I got older, everything that I didn't like about Ireland, and I have accepted the things that I don't like about Mexico, or haven't liked about Mexico in the past. I accept them totally. No. Did you fully accept those values, or were there some that you could just never fully accept? Do you know what I mean? Like, you always felt like this. I'm just never going to get that.
I think I learned to accept accept it for what it was, and that those were the circumstances I had chosen to live under, and that while part of our jobs, and that was why the King Abdullah at the time brought us to Saudi Arabia. He was a more liberal king. The current king is still fairly liberal as well, but he was far more liberal than his predecessors. And he brought foreigners to work in Saudi Arabia at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, KAUST. Part of the reason for bringing outsiders in was to help quietly, gently change the culture, one person at a time. Not, for instance, we went from a Thursday-Friday weekend to a Friday-Saturday weekend, so that the Sabbath would fall on Friday and people could play on Saturday.
Okay.
And the king just announced it overnight. Mm-hmm. He said, starting this week, the weekend is now Friday, Saturday. So I'm going to give you all Thursday, Friday, and Saturday off, so you can reschedule everything social you had on Thursday to Saturday. You've got 1 week to make it work. And a king can issue those kinds of mandates. But there are other mandates that if you just issued them as king, you could cause a revolution or a mini rebellion within your kingdom. And so the way to change them is in a slow and gentle fashion, and introducing the concept slowly, bringing in foreigners who aren't aggressive, aren't confrontational, who appreciate the differences and learn to live with those differences while introducing alternative ideas for people to think about them, contemplate them.
There's yes, exactly. Though there may be some ideas that people will never get, because it's not in the language. We spoke about compromise, which is a word in English. It's an unusual word in the sense that it means to lose, but for the benefit of, you compromise by sacrificing something. Yes. For the benefit of both parties, and that that particular word, compromise, that idea doesn't exist in Spanish. I mean, there are all sorts of wonderful phrases in Spanish about how to collaborate, but that idea of losing in order to win is not something that exists in Spanish. So in a situation of conflict, it's actually quite difficult sometimes to reach a compromise because the concept doesn't exist, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Though there are, what am I getting at? My point is, but there are other phrases, there are other ideas about collaboration in Spanish, which are very nice, and which will allow you to find some kind of a solution. But it's not quite the same thing.
No.
As both sides losing in order to win as one. Yeah.
Yes. It's more negotiating, but it's not seen as giving something up for the good. It's giving something up to win something else.
Yes.
Where when I think of compromise and what I'm willing to sacrifice, as opposed to I must give it up in order to gain something else, there is a significant difference between the two concepts.
Yes, and I think that this is just an example of how language shapes our world. You know, the limits of our the limits of our language are the limits of our world. No. It is great speaking multiple languages because you get a whole load of ideas. That there are ideas in Spanish that don't exist in English, for example, you know, which would be great, which it would be great to have, you know. But how do you? Because where was I going with this? I was going to say that it has caused problems for me in the work environment in Mexico, for example. Because I kind of assumed in a way that concepts like compromising existence in the Spanish speaking world, but there literally isn't a word for it, you know. So that means that your whole approach to teamwork, for example, needs to change because you're not in Kansas anymore, you know. You're not in Ireland. You're not in Ireland working in Ireland. You're an Irishman working in Mexico, so you have to adapt, you know. How have you dealt with? Have you come up across those or come up against those kinds of situations when you've been traveling and working abroad, or maybe even in friendships or whatever? How do you deal with all of that, or is it not an issue for you?
Oh no, it's definitely been an issue over time.
Right.
One of the more dramatic examples is being in Australia and meeting educated Aboriginals, because there are three types of Aborigines. There are those that have been completely assimilated into Australian culture. Usually it began years ago against their will, but now enough generations have passed that they're part of Australian society, and there's still tension, there's still discrimination.
Yeah.
Then there are the Aborigines that were caught in the transition, where the country had started to force upon them an English or a British lifestyle and approach to living, when the world said, wait, that's wrong, we need to stop that. And they got caught in the middle, where they aren't completely part of other culture, of one or the other culture. And then there's the third Aboriginal culture, where they have been allowed to live as they have always lived, a nomadic tribe. And in the third category, there is no future tense in their language. So if you ask a young person, do you want to be a doctor someday? They will tell you, I'm not a doctor. And if you say, do you want to study and do you want to become a doctor? They look at you like you have two heads, but I'm not a doctor. And because they have no concept of future tense and planning for the future, and they live moment by moment, day by day, and you know they never had to plant fields, so they don't know agriculture. They live off the land until the land can no longer support them, and then they move to another location until the land and the animals can no longer support them. And so to teach them about using tools or planning for the future or planting crops is beyond their lingual capacity. It's not an intellectual capacity.
No, it's just
the lack of
there, yeah.
the concept.
Which is, it's not necessarily a bad. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because every culture is different, and there are advantages to living in the moment, I suppose. Maybe you might be a bit less anxious, for example, as a person or as a culture, if you're not constantly worrying about what's going to happen in the future. But then there are disadvantages as well, because certain things in life are better if they are planned. No, healthcare, for example. No? So you were trying to help, but how does that work?
Ships, as another expression, ships passing in the night.
Right.
That
and what
you understood in
what did you just kind of did what you could and accepted them for how they are, I suppose. That's the only way.
Yes. Yeah. My children did community service in the Aboriginal communities, and to teach them about recycling, or how to live in a house and how to use it was all just foreign to them. The government would give them houses, and the third category of Aborigines, who are nomadic, had no idea what to do with a house, because you couldn't pick it up and take it with you when it was time to go.
That's a big conflict in Europe. In Ireland, where I'm from, that there's always a very big conflict, or there has been, between the traveling community, who are Romani gypsies, and people who buy houses with mortgages, because the gypsies, the travelers rather, will arrive, and suddenly they will be there in front of your house, that causes great conflict, because people who buy houses don't want to have people just moving in but it's a completely different way of looking at life. Travelers travel. They don't see the point, and actually they wouldn't want to be living. They don't want to be given a house. They want to move. In many cases, which is so that causes an awful lot of conflict. It's very difficult for especially for the settled people, for people who buy houses, to accept a culture that's so different,
And how have the people who have traditionally lived in houses and owned their land, how have they interacted with the travelers to arrive at
not well? Not well. There's violence often, or there's discrimination to begin with, and sometimes outright violence,
And how does the discrimination manifest itself?
Well, they might phone the police, and then the police come and ask the travelers to move, and then the travelers don't move. I don't know what this, to be honest, it's been a long time since I've lived in Ireland. It's been, over 25 years. So I don't know what the situation is like now. But I imagine, because the way people are, I imagine things haven't changed very much. People don't tend to, culture tends to stay the same. And it's generally it's the police moving people on, or maybe arresting them. It's not pleasant.
Any differences in the monetary systems that are used between the more sedentary people and the travelers?
Oh no, I think as far as I know, the travelers use currency. They use euros, and they work and stuff, they buy and sell things, and they work in different kinds of jobs. In jobs, I suppose that you can do moving around, because they move a lot, They're in a place for a couple of months, and then or a few months, and then they move on,
I was.
And it's the same in Spain. I'm not particularly familiar with it, but I think that you've got the Romani people in Spain as well, and in different parts of Europe, you know.
Yes.
And,
Well, and there are also Romani families in the United States now. I don't know.
Oh, yes, that's true.
My daughter worked in the hotel industry, and periodically they would have Romani families arrive at the hotel, and I don't know at what point there were more immigrants from that part of the world, and what the percentage of the North American population might be at this point in time. Now, and the reason I asked about the currency was when I was in Africa, I went to Cameroon and to Kenya and to South Africa for extended periods of time, and I have adopted siblings from Congo and Cameroon. And one of the things we learned was a lot of trading and bartering, that the tribes far away from the major cities didn't have currency and didn't have a way to earn the local currency. And so they developed jewelry or cooking utensils or agricultural tools, and that became their specialty, so they could trade it with another tribe that maybe specialized in, maybe the people who did farming tools would trade with the people who did cooking tools, because they didn't have a common currency, so they had to create their own.
I think they might. I'm speaking, without actually knowing, but I imagine among the Romani people in Ireland, they probably barter things like horses. They exchange horses or cars, and there's that system. But I imagine that because they don't have a property in the sense of like a house, that the only kind of power that they have is money. Does that make sense?
And to earn money
in a way of the people, of getting people to leave them alone is if they have cash, I imagine it'd be interesting to investigate more about this. I really don't know. I'm talking off the top of my head, as usual.
Yes. And my suspicion or my gut instinct tells me that manual labor is probably their source of currency, because they need their horses. They carry minimal personal possessions with them. And so that in order to gain entry into stores and restaurants and to survive, and not being in a position to be sedentary and farm to raise their crops, that they would be exchanging their labor for currency so they could acquire the basic life necessities. But interesting topic to explore. And now I think Dara. There you are. You're back.
Yes, I'm back. That was sorry, my
Welcome
internet
back.
cut out for a second there. Yes, you were saying that they probably they'd sell their labor, no? Which is something that we all do anyway. But I mean, you're talking about physical labor, construction work maybe, or farm work. Yeah, exactly. So we've got another question here. So do you want to ask me this question? I think this question was meant for me, no? Question number 2. Interpreting versus translating. Oh, yeah.
Well, we've touched on the struggle.
We've spoken about that. Spoken about that. So why don't I ask you a question?
Okay.
So if fluency isn't just vocabulary, maybe we need a new definition. If our goal is to not lose our personality, how do we build cultural literacy? Is it movies? Is it reading the room? What's the practical move for the professional who feels invisible in a foreign workplace? I suppose, yeah. I think we've already spoken about that, but I suppose the idea here is it jumps out at me if our goal is to not lose our personality. But I think we do have to lose our personality, no? That's what you were saying at the beginning, you know? We have to accept that we do lose a part of ourselves when that's why living in another country is fun in many ways, because we lose ourselves, no?
But we gain something at the same time. So it's a forced evolution or a needed evolution and it's a heightening of all of our sensitivities, that we can't just rely on our eyes or on our hearing or on touch. You know, it's like the blind man, the deaf man, they all touch an elephant and try to explain what it is they're seeing, hearing, experiencing. And I think that we heighten our sensitivity to our word choice. When someone says something, before I respond, I will oftentimes repeat what I think they've said or what I think they've asked, to make certain that we have accurate communication.
It's just struck me, do you think it's possible to learn a foreign language or a second language, or a third one or a fourth one, without losing ourselves, without having that humility and sacrificing, if you like, a part of who we are when we speak that foreign language, you know? Because we can't expect the foreign language to be the same as our language, or for the people who speak that language to share our values necessarily. So for me, part of learning a foreign language is leaving who you are at the door, you know? And I think that is probably maybe very uncomfortable for most people, and that might be why many people find it difficult to learn a foreign language or a second language, you know? Because they never get beyond you know, ordering a coffee or things like that. You know, it stays there, you know, because any kind of meaningful conversation generates misunderstanding and conflict. So they just
I think I'd use the metaphor of we lose our clothing, we lose our accessories, and we're stripped down to bare nothingness, and we have to acquire new clothing and new accessories to fit into the new culture. That things we took for granted, things that we said daily or did daily, don't make sense in the new culture. And it's like, you know, taking off the jewelry and putting on the new jewelry or the new approach to clothing. That our language has to adapt and our sensibilities have to adapt. And so it's more a stripped down model of the human being, that you have to be willing to expose yourself and admit your ignorance or concede your lack of knowledge. I see many people who nod through the whole conversation. My housekeeper sometimes does that to me, even when I'm speaking to her in Spanish. She'll nod, and then I'll say, "And did you understand what I said?" No. Okay, let's try again. We have to be vulnerable to that. It feels like nakedness when you're in a room of native Spanish speakers. And my Spanish is excellent, but it's slow and it's deliberate and it's thoughtful, where the locals can speak at the speed of light and I maybe only catch 50%, and I have to be vulnerable and open myself up to say, we need to slow it down. I need to take it step by step and break it down, because I do not think I understand what we're talking about or what we're attempting to agree to.
And also, who says that the culture that you're originally from, you know, in my case, Ireland, is who you are? You know what I mean? So in that sense, you're not losing anything, but you're you're gaining a new culture, you know? I think that idea would be very scary for a lot of people, I feel, but maybe.
But that really resonates with me because, as we mentioned in a previous podcast, I grew up in foster homes and group homes. And one of the advantages I took away from that was evaluating and judging each family and saying, these are the characteristics I want in me, and these are the characteristics I don't want to repeat. And it helped me shape myself into a better, stronger person. Where, for example, one of my siblings refused to go into foster care and stayed with our biological parents, and they didn't have the same evolution that the rest of us did who left the home. And so to move from culture to culture and see the good and the bad and the different in all of them, and try to acquire the pieces that feel a part of you. Like when I came to Mexico as an exchange student in high school, the culture seeped into my pores. It was in my heart. When I took my kids here 40 years later, they said, "Mom, we've never seen you happier than when you were in Oaxaca. You need to retire here someday." So it was a great gift to come back here at the end. It's not the end of my life, obviously, but in my older years, and be part of the culture that I felt
another life, like it's another life.
And how do you feel about living in Mexico? And you have a lot of years in now, and do you feel like you have a culture, or that you're part of many cultures?
I feel like I'm me.
Okay.
And I adapt to the situation, I adapt to the situation. I take what I value from each culture. I really make an effort to value cultural differences, So for example, I'm a talker, as you know. So that works very well in Argentina, because people from Argentina are talkers too. Mexicans value silence very much. Silence is dignity. It is undignified to be a blabbermouth, and they don't like it, And so that is very, very different to the way Irish people are educated, and it's very different to the way people in Argentina, I think, are educated, and that's why Irish people and Argentine people as well in Mexico are considered a bit arrogant, stuck up, and always talking and giving their ideas and stuff. So I've learned to really value that Mexican value of silence, if that makes sense. I put it in my toolkit. So there are moments where I am vocal, and there are many moments where I'm not, and I value both points of view. It's not that I value being vocal over being silent, or being silent over being vocal. And I found that people accept me much more for who I am, because I truly value who they are, even though it's not natural for me to value those things. Does that make sense?
That makes
sense. It requires the outsider, to really take the first step and make the effort, which I think is probably it's difficult. It requires work, which is what you were saying at the beginning. It is work. It is work, but you gain so much from it. You really do gain so much from it, and it gives you it broadens your horizons. Travel broadens your horizons, doesn't it?
Oh, and in ways people can't even imagine.
So thank you very much, Deb. We should wrap up, because we've been going for about an hour now.
Okay.
And that was really, really interesting. I think you and I had not touched on this idea of being an outsider so much. I mean, we've spoken about, obviously, cultural differences and language preparing for this podcast, but it was fascinating to learn from your experience of being an outsider, an outsider myself. and how you know how we've got similar values on this, and different experiences as well. It's not never one size fits all, is it? It's this stuff.
And more conversations like this need to happen among people who are new to a neighborhood or a country or a culture.
Yeah.
So that they understand they're not alone, that there are different options and different ways of being, and different pathways into understanding, being accepted, and being a part of their new culture.
Yeah.
That there's no one size fits all.
I personally think that this is an enormous part of learning languages, and there are certain countries and cultures that do that very, very well. The Belgians, for example, or it's the Scandinavians. They just really do get this idea that you're learning, let's say, Italian. You cannot expect Italians to be like Swedish people. And there will be different words for things, there'll be different ideas about things. And if you're going to learn Italian, you get stuck in and you have to accept that culture, and that's part of what makes them great language learners, And in other cultures, the UK, for example, sorry, England, not very good. The English are not very good at learning languages. There are many English people who speak. Irish people are not very good either. Kind of insular places, where we kind of expect everybody to be exactly the same as we are, But anyway, so thank you very much for Deborah and people who are popping in and out. I don't think we have any comments we'll check the comments in a little while, and we'll be sure to reply to any that are there. But thank you very much for those who joined, and if you ever had to bridge a gap between two cultures, we'd love to hear your story, and we would also love if you could subscribe to this channel if you like the video, like it. I'm Darragh O'Grady. This has been Debra Carlson. Thank you very much for thinking with us today.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.